In our previous video, we talked about the flash or the thermal radiation that comes from nuclear detonation. Knowing what to do after that flash can save your life. All right, that thermal radiation, or that flash as we called it, we mentioned before it can cause burns, severe burns, or even fatalities if it's actually hit you just the right way or if you're too close to the detonation of the nuclear explosion. However, there's more to it than that. What happens is this: that thermal radiation has so much energy. In fact, up to half of the actual energy released in the nuclear detonation can actually be from that flash or thermal radiation. And if it actually hits parts of your house, your yard, that are not kept properly, it can actually cause a fire that can erupt very quickly. If you have any debris around your home, we're talking about newspapers, cardboard boxes, any type of trash laying around, unkempt limbs, branches, wood piles, etc., or even your house too. If your house is not painted, or if it is painted very dark, but if it actually has exposed wood and such, all of that can and will burst into flames from that thermal radiation. We're talking about, well, again, we actually reference a 1 megaton nuclear bomb from Russia because that's the majority of their inventory. We're talking about within a 10-mile radius, pretty much guaranteed your house and debris is going to catch on fire. Up to 20 miles though, depending on the circumstances. As we mentioned last time, depending on the clarity of the day, if it's a clear day out, all those things will come into place, and you may actually inadvertently allow your house and property to catch on fire very quickly simply from that flash that comes from the nuclear bomb. But there's more to it than that, and a scary part of that too. We do have to worry about, obviously, the detonation or explosion, the impact from the bomb. You know, if the actual impact hits your body, surprisingly, our body can absorb it. It's very resilient. But man-made structures and such don't fare too well. And a lot of people worry about that detonation or bomb hitting like glass. And they'll tell you, oh, you need to actually get to the inside of your house because you don't want the glass to hit you. It's not about that at all. I mean, partly it's about that. You don't want glass to hit you. But the building itself may collapse. Things may actually come flying through the windows. But the scary part is too, that thermal radiation or flash can also go through the windows. And if you actually have a mattress, papers, tables, etc., anything within shot of the flash through the window hitting it, inside your home, it will also catch on fire and burst in flames. And again, depending on how far you are from the detonation itself. But that's only half the story. It's not even half. It's only like a small part of what's coming, especially when we're looking at a 1 megaton nuclear detonation. Because so many things are catching on fire, or we'll even say flash firing, catching on fire quickly like that, it causes a mass eruption of flames. Again, we're talking about a 10-mile radius of the detonation or more. And that fire builds up so quickly, it becomes an inferno. So let's say that you are in your house and you get trapped there. Maybe part of the house collapsed, or maybe you're simply just in a room as the fire outside develops. The heat and the fire develops so intensely and so quickly, it actually sets up what's called a superfire. Gale force winds of an inferno will develop. We're talking about 10 miles radius. So in a 20-mile diameter circle, even more, it's nothing but one monstrous raging fire. And it's inescapable. You're going to asphyxiate. And gale force winds will come through and literally cause this fire to move almost like an entity of its own, engulfing everything. Now, when I say everything, every single piece of combustible material within that radius is going to burn. Everything will, including you and me. So let's say that you're outside. You actually get hit by the shock wave, and you maybe get knocked to the ground even, and then a light pole falls on your leg. You're like, yay, I survived. If you're within that 10-mile radius, no. That flash, even more so, even though the flash precedes the shock wave, understand that, I'm not doing it necessarily in order, you're going to burst in flames. And so will everything around you, all the houses and such. And this flash fire, this super fire, as we call it again, is by far the most scariest and devastating effects we'll see beyond simply the destruction from the shockwave itself. So looking at this historically speaking, let's talk about Hiroshima, or as most people call it, Hiroshima. It was a 15 kiloton bomb. Again, 15 kilotons compared to a 1 megaton. A one megaton is 80 times larger than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. And again, the Russians have well over 1,000, probably a few thousand of just the 1 megatons aimed at us. All right, when that bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, it caused a superfire as well, from the debris, from the buildings and everything else. And it actually erupted, the superfire finally came into place 20 minutes after the detonation, 20 minutes. So it's not like instant, but in that case, since the yield was so low compared to the 1 megaton, the fire started building up, then eventually a superfire developed, and everything in that 1 mile radius, so again, 2 miles in diameter of that entire zone, every single piece of combustible material was destroyed. And that was a much smaller nuclear detonation. Now for a 1 megaton burst, and again, we're typically looking at the air burst where the bomb will go off above the city, we're looking at a 10-mile radius of destruction. So 20 miles across, every single thing inside that 20-mile diameter, any combustible material will be completely destroyed, obliterated. There's no survival inside there. Outside of that area, we're still looking at destruction too. So I don't think it's going to stop right there. Upwards of 20 miles, perhaps, we're actually looking at flash fires and other areas where minor pockets of superfires may develop, but you're still not escaped even though you're outside that 10-mile zone. So we always mention, if you see the flash, duck and cover. This has been going on since the 50s. See the flash, duck and cover. See the flash, duck and cover. No time to run, no time to get inside of a building. Even though you would think if the superfire is coming, getting inside the building may actually save you, but that destruction is coming after you. Again, hitting your body, you're probably going to be okay, but the debris that's coming along with that shockwave is going to probably kill you. So if there's a piece of curb, cement, you want to dive down next to it, next to a building. Even if you're inside a building, duck and cover, duck and cover. If you can duck and cover and try to crawl toward the inside of the house, it's even better. But again, the superfire that's coming after that is actually more of a destructive force and something we actually have to worry about as far as what's coming after. Now, how far you are from the center or the epicenter of that nuclear detonation will determine the sequence of events. Understand when the bomb goes off, boop, right here at the center, we're going to see the flash, the thermal radiation, and the shock wave propagating simultaneously, practically speaking. But as we go out, the flash or the thermal radiation actually travels at the speed of light, exceedingly fast. The shock wave will lag behind it. The shock wave travels just over the speed of sound. So here's the bomb, here's the flash, and then the shock wave. But notice not simply just going faster, but watch this. I'll start over here. Here's the flash, here's the shock wave. Notice that the flash is going to have a further dilation compared to the shock wave. So if you're actually close to the detonation, you're going to have the flash, and then shock wave is going to hit you very quickly. Flash, shock wave. The further you are from the detonation, you're going to see a wider gap. You have a flash, then you may actually have seconds, but you'll never know. You don't know where the detonation's at. You're not going to be looking. If you are looking, the flash is going to blind you. So either way, if you see the flash, again, as we said before, duck and cover. But understand that the shock wave is traveling just over 700 miles an hour. The flash is traveling the speed of light. So it'll actually reach you far before the shock wave will. So there's actually time. How much time? Depending how you are from the epicenter of the blast, for you to duck and cover and get down. So ultimately, if you're within 10 miles of a strategic target, military base perhaps, political areas, within that 10 miles, you are a target as well. And obviously, this is a prepping channel. We're all about preparations. We're not about living in fear. You prepare ahead of time. How do you prepare ahead of time for something like this if you live so close? Well, we'll talk about some strategies for that in just a moment. But you have to understand that if you do live near those, let's say you live near one of the silos in the Dakotas, just live off base, or maybe there's a silo somewhat near you. The Russians in those particular areas actually have redundancy. In redundancy, we're talking about multiple missiles targeted on specific areas. And from our intel, what we know for sure is the Russians, for each particular area that's actually of strategic importance, will actually have not one, but two, at least, nuclear warheads aimed at that specific area. One set up for an air burst, one set up for a ground burst. So preparations, first off, before anything else, if you're within that 10-mile radius, you don't stand much of a chance, if a chance at all, of getting out if a bomb goes off. So what is that difference between the flash and the shock wave? For a 1 megaton blast, We're looking at first off, after 10 seconds, that's when the fireball is going to be at its largest size, by the way, for a nuclear blast. At that point, 10 seconds, the shock wave is now 3 miles from the blast. So 10 seconds for the shock wave to hit. Now again, the flash is almost, as far as our eyes are concerned, instantaneous, speed of light. But the shock wave 10 seconds later is going to be 3 miles away. However, after 50 seconds, we're talking about almost a minute later, the shock wave is now 12 miles away. Now remember, we're talking about the destruction area is all within practically 10 miles of total destruction, radius that is. Further out than that, it can still be destructive, but we're talking about 50 seconds later, the shock wave has now hit 12 miles out. That's crazy how slow the shock wave really goes. I mean, in our minds that's slow. It actually travels, at that point, by the way, 50 seconds later, it's still traveling at 784 miles an hour. Now, again, that's not enough to really cause any problems with us. That'd be one serious wind hitting you. But it's still enough to knock down buildings and trees and such, which is something you obviously must take into account, even though, again, you're outside of that 10-mile radius. So you can see how the flash almost instantly will hit. But 50 seconds later, almost a minute later, the shock wave now hits. We're talking 12 miles away. Interesting. Now, typical nuclear missiles, we're not talking about the hypersonic ones, typical ones, you may actually get a 20-minute warning. Well, at least our government will, a 20-minute warning before the target hits. And through our emergency alert system, which, back in the day it was through sirens, and I know a lot of small towns still have them. A nuclear alert, by the way, is short intervals. The sirens, that's a horrible sound, wasn't it? The sirens, for long intervals actually have different meanings, like tornadoes, or sometimes call out the fire department. But short blast on there lets you know of a nuclear detonation. But more so, your phones are now part of this emergency alert system. If you recall, a few years ago, there was actually an alert sent to Hawaii saying that a missile was heading their way. And people were like, what do we even do? They didn't even know what to do as far as like duck and cover or anything. And it turns out, for some reason, it was a false alarm. But we are looking at, there's an emergency alert system that they actually have set up so your phone will give you an alert. I'm sure you've probably heard it before. You ever been to like a grocery store, then everybody's phone's going off saying there's like a weather front coming in or something like that. And that's basically their way of letting you know that there may be a nuclear detonation. So let's say you do live within that 10-mile radius, or let's say you work on a military base and you're not like part of your duty right now and you want to get out of there. Think about this. You go to get your car and you're like, that's it, I'm out of here. And you take off. Even if you like instantly got on the highway driving 60 miles an hour, it's still going to take you 10 minutes to hit that 10 miles away from the epicenter of the nuclear detonation. We're not even talking about time to get to your car, get people in your car, family in your car, get it started, get to the highway. Traffic, there may be actually be accidents or people getting this alerts too and causing problems. You don't have much of a chance for this. Again, this is all about preparations. It's very difficult to prep in that particular situation as far as not getting hit by a nuclear missile or being part of that Superfire. And that's with a typical missile. The Russians now have hypersonic missiles. And the hypersonic missiles are so fast that there's actually barely time for any type of alert. And it's actually, in that case, even worse. So I'm not going to go as far as say you need to move away from these particular areas as far as nuclear detonations go. But I will tell you, it's a very scary time to be living near a military installation or on one, especially if it's actually a strategic one. We're even talking about the White House and stuff too, with the Russians and the redundancy of using the 1 megaton bombs, multiple bursts, trying to destroy that area. There's not much chance to get away. One of your best chances, however, is simply practice. If you are in the military, for example, or if you live in that area, practice. Practice getting to your car, see how long it takes you. Practice, see how long it takes you to drive outside that zone. Sometimes that's all you can do. As far as your house goes, though, as far as preparations, again, it's all about prepping. We don't live in fear in this. If your house needs a good coat of paint, do it. Lighter color paints are better. Try to clean up trash, debris, limbs and such, and leaves from around your house. Don't leave that stuff there because guaranteed it will catch on fire. As far as your house goes, hopefully structure-wise it won't be destroyed. You may not have any choice in that either. Consider building a bomb shelter. Now the bomb shelter itself is going to take you below ground per se, so therefore the destruction of the Superfire probably won't actually hit you. But this next video that we're going to be coming out is going to be talking about fallout and radiation. man, there are all kinds of fallacies, all kinds of misinformation being put out there. I'm not going to say disinformation. Disinformation is a military practice, intelligence practice, where we purposely try to put false information out. I've seen so many people commenting on this channel who have disinformation saying, "Oh, you're wrong. No, you're being misinformed." No, you're being disinformed because you're actually using information that's propaganda that is simply not true. You need to stick with the facts. One of the previous videos I put out where I talked about simply with Russia and possibly sending a nuke to the US was all about preps. It wasn't even talk about being political, but boy, that started a Superfire of its own as far as being political about this. It's not about politics, it's about prepping, being prepared for you and your family. So the next videos, besides this one too, I would certainly make sure you watch for those. Fallout and radiation. We'll also talk about EMPs. We'll talk about nuclear power plants, and we'll talk about all the things that it's going to help you. But fallout is probably the #1 thing people need to be able to prepare for. It's super deadly, but it's also the #1 thing I've seen countless wrong information from other channels. Countless. And it's I don't know if they've read books about this, but it's so wrong. They're using Hollywood stuff. I talk about that all the time. Hollywood always talks about these things and they make it nice and flashy to watch the movie, but that's not how it is at all. But anyways, that's the next nuclear video we're looking at is Fallout. I hope to see you for that video. In the meantime, go ahead and check out this video here and see how we can continue to prep.